Some places aren't meant to be remembered. Some stories aren't meant to be told. But tonight, we're breaking that silence. Deep in the heart of America's heartland lies Nebraska, a state of endless cornfields, forgotten highways, and secrets buried beneath the prairie soil. Most people drive through it without a second thought, but those who've stopped, those who ventured off the beaten path, they've discovered something else entirely, something that watches from the shadows, something that waits. Tonight, I'm bringing you 3 true stories from Nebraska that will make you question everything you thought you knew about the Midwest. These aren't legends passed down through generations. These are recent events, real people, real terror. And before we begin, I need to warn you, once you hear these stories, you might never look at Nebraska the same way again. You might never look at any small town the same way again. So turn off your lights, lock your doors, and whatever you do, don't pause this video, because some stories demand to be heard in one sitting. Before we dive into the darkness, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next on this channel. Now, let's begin. In the fall of 2019, Marcus Webb was driving home to Omaha after visiting his sister in Lincoln. It was a Tuesday night, just past 11 p.m., and Highway 77 stretched out before him like a black ribbon cutting through endless cornfields. Marcus had made this drive 100 times before. He knew every exit, every curve, every mile marker. But that night, Highway 77 would show him something new. The temperature had dropped suddenly, and a thick fog rolled in from nowhere, swallowing his headlights within seconds. Marcus slowed down, squinting through the windshield, his hands gripping the steering wheel tighter. That's when he saw her. A woman stood on the side of the road, her thumb out, illuminated for just a moment in his headlights. She wore a white dress that seemed to glow in the fog, and her long dark hair hung wet against her shoulders. Marcus's first instinct was to keep driving. Picking up hitchhikers at night was asking for trouble. But something made him stop. Maybe it was the way she stood so still, like a statue. Maybe it was the isolation of the moment. Or maybe it was something else entirely, something pulling at his mind like invisible strings. He pulled over about 20 feet past her and watched in his rearview mirror as she approached. Her movements were strange, too smooth, too gliding, like she was floating rather than walking. Marcus felt his stomach tighten, but he couldn't drive away now. That would be crazy, wouldn't it? She opened the passenger door, and a wave of cold air rushed in, carrying with it the smell of wet earth and something else, something rotten beneath the surface. She slid into the seat without a word, her white dress leaving no moisture on the upholstery, despite being soaked moments before. "Thanks for stopping," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "No one stops anymore." Marcus forced a smile. "Where are you headed?" "North, just north." He put the car in drive and pulled back onto the highway. The fog seemed thicker now, pressing against the windows like living hands. Marcus tried to make conversation, asking her name, where she was from, but she only stared straight ahead, her hands folded in her lap. Her skin was pale. No, not just pale. It was gray, like old newspaper left in the rain. "You okay?" Marcus asked, his voice cracking slightly. Are you sick or something?" She turned to look at him then, and Marcus's blood ran cold. Her eyes were completely black, no whites, no pupils, just endless darkness that seemed to pull at his vision. She smiled, and her teeth were too white, too perfect, too many. "I died on this road," she said simply. "March 15th, 1987. My name was Sarah Henning. The car went into the ditch at mile marker 34. They never found all of me." Marcus slammed on the brakes and the car skidded to a stop in the middle of the highway. He turned to confront her, to tell her to get out, to scream. But the passenger seat was empty. The door was still closed. The seat belt was still buckled, but she was gone. His heart hammering, Marcus fumbled for his phone and Googled Sarah Henning, Nebraska, 1987, Highway 77. The results made his hands shake so badly he almost dropped the device. A newspaper article from March 16, 1987. Local woman dies in Highway 77 accident. The photo showed a young woman with long dark hair, wearing a white dress. The same woman that had just been sitting next to him. According to the article, Sarah Henning had been driving home from a wedding when her car hydroplaned in the fog and crashed into a ditch at mile marker 34. The vehicle had caught fire. Her body had been burned so badly that dental records were needed for identification. Marcus looked at his dashboard. Mile marker 34 was exactly 1 mile ahead. He should have driven away. He should have turned around and taken the long way home. But something compelled him forward. That same invisible pull that had made him stop in the first place. When he reached mile marker 34, he pulled over and got out of his car, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. The ditch was still there, of course, overgrown with tall grass and weeds. Marcus climbed down, using his phone's flashlight to navigate the uneven ground. He didn't know what he was looking for. A sign, maybe. Proof that he wasn't losing his mind. That's when he saw it. Half buried in the mud was a skull, gray and weathered, with patches of long dark hair still clinging to it. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the flowers, fresh white lilies, placed carefully around the skull, as if someone had been there recently, as if someone was still tending to this makeshift grave. Marcus scrambled backwards, his shoes slipping in the mud. He ran back to his car and drove. He didn't stop until he reached Omaha, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold the steering wheel. The next day, he called the police and reported what he found. When the authorities investigated, they discovered that the crash site had never been properly excavated. Sarah Henning's family had received a body, or what they thought was a body, but forensic analysis would later reveal that the remains buried in her grave belonged to someone else entirely. Sarah never left Highway 77, and according to local reports, she hasn't still. In the years since Marcus's encounter, at least 15 other drivers have reported picking up a woman in a white dress on Highway 77, always near mile marker 34, always in the fog. And every single one of them describes the same thing. Black eyes, too many teeth, and a voice that whispers, "They never found all of me." Marcus moved to Colorado 3 months after that night. He refuses to drive through Nebraska. When asked about his experience, he'll only say one thing. Some people don't stay buried. And some roads don't let you forget. If you're still watching, drop a comment below telling me if you'd stop for a hitchhiker on a foggy night. And stick around. The next story is even darker. In the small town of Hastings, Nebraska, population barely scraping 25,000, there stands a building that locals refuse to talk about. It's not marked on any tourist maps. GPS systems seem to glitch when you get too close. And if you ask the old-timers at the local diner about it, they'll suddenly remember they have somewhere else to be. This is the story of the Hastings Regional Psychiatric Hospital, or what's left of it. The asylum opened in 1912, built on the outskirts of town where the screams wouldn't disturb the good Christian folk of Hastings. For 73 years, it operated in the shadows, treating patients with methods that would make modern doctors sick to their stomachs. Electroshock therapy without anesthesia, ice baths that lasted for hours, lobotomies performed in basement rooms with no witnesses. And then there were the rumors. Whispers of patients who checked in but never checked out. Their names erased from records. Their families told they'd been transferred to facilities that didn't exist. The asylum closed in 1985 after a series of mysterious deaths among the staff. The official story was budget cuts and outdated facilities. But the truth, as always, was far more disturbing. And in 2021, 3 urban explorers from Colorado decided they were going to uncover that truth. Their names were Jake Morrison, his girlfriend Rebecca Chen, and their friend Tyler Kowalski. They ran a YouTube channel called Abandoned America, exploring forgotten buildings and documenting their decay. They'd investigated hundreds of locations, old hospitals, defunct prisons, collapsed hotels. They'd seen it all, or so they thought. When they heard about the Hastings Asylum through an online forum, they knew they had to check it out. They arrived on a Saturday night in October, the air crisp with the promise of an early winter. The building loomed against the dark sky like a tombstone, its broken windows reflecting moonlight like dead eyes. The main structure was 4 stories tall, built from red brick that had faded to the color of dried blood. Vines crawled up the walls like grasping fingers, and the front entrance gaped open, the doors long since torn from their hinges. Jake set up his camera, checking the battery and memory card. All right, guys, this is it. The Hastings Regional Psychiatric Hospital. Let's see what secrets you're hiding. They entered through the main lobby, their flashlights cutting through darkness so thick that it felt solid. The floor was littered with broken glass, torn papers, and what looked like old medical equipment rusting in the corners. The walls were covered in graffiti, most of it mindless tags, but some of it more disturbing. Crude drawings of faces screaming, words scratched into the plaster that said things like, "They're still here," and "Don't go to the basement." "Probably just trying to scare people," Tyler said, though his voice carried an edge of uncertainty. They explored the first floor methodically, documenting everything. The reception area with its collapsed ceiling, the day room where patients once sat in medicated stupors, the cafeteria with its overturned tables and chairs scattered like something had caused people to flee in a panic. Everything was exactly what you'd expect from an abandoned asylum. Creepy, decayed, but ultimately just a building. Then they found the stairs leading down. "Basement level," Jake read from a faded sign. "Patient housing and treatment facilities." Rebecca grabbed his arm. "Maybe we should skip this part. I've got a really bad feeling." Jake laughed, though it sounded forced. "Come on, Becca, we've done this 100 times. It's just a basement." But it wasn't just a basement. The stairs descended into darkness so complete that their flashlights seemed to be swallowed by it. The temperature dropped with each step and the air became thick with the smell of mold and something else, something chemical and sweet, like formaldehyde mixed with rot. The walls down here were different too. Instead of the red brick of the upper floors, these walls were concrete, painted a sickly green that had peeled away in long strips. At the bottom of the stairs, they found themselves in a long hallway lined with doors. Heavy steel doors with small windows reinforced with wire mesh. Patient rooms. Cells, really. Most of the doors stood open, revealing tiny spaces barely big enough for a bed and a toilet, but some of the doors were closed. Locked from the outside. "Why would they still be locked?" Rebecca whispered. "The place has been abandoned for almost 40 years. Tyler approached one of the closed doors and peered through the window. He jerked back immediately, his face pale. "Holy shit! There's stuff in there! Like someone's been living here!" Jake pushed past him and looked. Inside the cell was a mattress, relatively clean, with blankets folded neatly at the foot. A small table held what looked like canned food and bottles of water, and on the walls, covering every inch of available space, were photographs, hundreds of them. Polaroids and printed pictures all showing the same thing. People sleeping. Different people in different beds, but always sleeping, always unaware they were being photographed. "We need to leave," Rebecca said, backing away. "Right now. This isn't abandoned. Someone's here." That's when they heard it. A sound coming from deeper in the basement, a rhythmic thumping, like something heavy being dragged across concrete. And underneath it, a voice. Singing. A woman's voice, high and childlike, singing a nursery rhyme. Ring around the rosy, pocket full of posies, ashes, ashes, we all fall down. The singing grew louder, closer, and then they saw her. She emerged from the darkness at the far end of the hallway, dragging something behind her, a woman in a hospital gown that was once white but was now stained with rust-colored streaks. Her hair hung in matted clumps around her face, and her feet were bare, bleeding from walking on the rough concrete. But it was her eyes that made Jake's camera slip from his trembling hands. Her eyes were wide, unblinking, and completely devoid of sanity. "New visitors?" she said, her voice switching from singing to speaking without changing tone. "Dr. Morrison will be so pleased. He's been waiting for new patients. We all have. It gets so lonely down here in the dark." "We're leaving," Jake said, trying to keep his voice steady. "We didn't mean to disturb you. We're just going to go back upstairs and—" "But you can't leave," the woman interrupted, tilting her head at an impossible angle. "You haven't had your treatment yet. None of us get to leave until we've had our treatment. That's the rule, Dr. Morrison's rule." She dropped what she'd been dragging, and it hit the floor with a wet thud. "It was a mannequin," Jake told himself. "It had to be a mannequin. Except mannequins don't have real hair. They don't have fingernails. And they don't smell like 3-day-old death." Tyler grabbed Rebecca's hand. "Run, now!" They bolted for the stairs, but the woman was impossibly fast. She didn't run. She scuttled, her limbs moving in ways that human limbs shouldn't move, like a spider wearing a person's skin. She reached Tyler first, her fingers too long, with too many joints wrapping around his ankle and pulling him down. He screamed, and the sound echoed through the basement like a prayer in a church. Jake and Rebecca didn't stop. They couldn't. They hit the stairs and climbed, Tyler's screams chasing them up from the darkness. Rebecca was crying, gasping for breath, and Jake pulled her forward, his mind refusing to process what he'd just seen. They burst through the front entrance and into the night, not stopping until they reached their car. Jake fumbled with the keys, his hand shaking so badly it took 3 tries to get them in the ignition. As the engine roared to life and they peeled away from the asylum, Rebecca looked back. Standing in the broken doorway, illuminated by moonlight, was the woman in the hospital gown. She wasn't alone. Dozens of figures stood behind her, all wearing the same style gown, all staring with the same empty eyes. And in front of them, just at the edge of the light, stood a tall man in a white coat, his face hidden in shadow. Dr. Morrison, Jake thought. Dr. Morrison is still seeing patients. They drove straight to the Hastings police station and told their story through tears and trembling voices. The officers listened with expressions that shifted from concern to something else. Something like recognition, like they'd heard this before. "We'll send someone to check it out," the desk sergeant said, but his eyes said otherwise. His eyes said, "We don't go there. Not at night. Not ever." Tyler Kowalski was never found. Search and rescue teams went through the asylum 3 times, assisted by cadaver dogs and thermal imaging equipment. They found evidence that someone had been living in the basement, the cells with their makeshift beds, the photographs on the walls. They found the body that the woman had been dragging, though it was too decomposed to identify. But they found no trace of Tyler, no trace of the woman in the hospital gown, and no trace of anyone else. The asylum was demolished 6 months later, bulldozed into rubble and buried under a parking lot for a new shopping center. But construction workers reported hearing screams coming from beneath the ground. Shoppers at the new mall complain of feeling watched, of seeing faces in the reflections of store windows that aren't really there. And sometimes, late at night when the mall is closed, security cameras catch figures wandering the parking lot in hospital gowns, searching for something they've lost. Jake and Rebecca never made another video. Their YouTube channel went dark, their last upload being the corrupted footage from that night. 12 minutes of static punctuated by screams and that childlike voice singing, "Ring around the rosy." We're 2 stories deep, and trust me, the darkness only gets deeper. Don't click away now. The final story will haunt you long after this video ends. And if you're brave enough to keep watching, hit that like button. Let me know you're still here. A local historian, Margaret Phillips, who had worked at the Hastings Library for 40 years, came forward after the demolition. She brought with her a box of documents she'd kept hidden in her basement, patient records from the asylum that she'd rescued before they could be destroyed in the 1985 closure. The records told a story that authorities had worked hard to bury. Between 1968 and 1985, over 300 patients had been admitted to the Hastings Regional Psychiatric Hospital. Only 127 were ever discharged or transferred to other facilities. The remaining 173 simply vanished from the records, their files marked with a single red stamp, treatment complete. Dr. Edward Morrison had been the chief psychiatrist from 1965 until his death in 1982. According to his colleagues, he'd become increasingly obsessed with the idea that mental illness could be cured through what he called environmental conditioning, keeping patients in complete darkness for extended periods of time, then exposing them to extreme stimuli. His methods were never officially approved, but in a place like the Hastings Asylum, oversight was minimal at best. Dr. Morrison died in the basement of the asylum, found by a janitor in one of the treatment rooms. The official cause of death was a heart attack, but the janitor's report, buried in the archives, told a different story. The doctor had been found with his own patient restraints locked around his wrists and ankles, his body positioned on one of the treatment tables, his eyes open, frozen in an expression of absolute terror. And the door to the room was locked from the inside, though the key was never found. After his death, staff members began reporting strange occurrences. Patients claimed to see Dr. Morrison walking the hallways at night, continuing his rounds as if nothing had changed. Equipment would turn on by itself in the treatment rooms, and patients who died in the asylum, and there were many in those final 3 years, would be seen days later, standing in doorways, sitting in common rooms, as if death was just another form of treatment. The asylum closed 3 years after Dr. Morrison's death, but according to Margaret Phillips, it never really stopped operating. She told reporters, "The building might be empty, but the work continues. Some doctors don't retire, they just change their patient base." When asked what she meant, she showed them one final document, a list of names. People who had gone missing in Adams County over the past 30 years. Urban explorers, homeless individuals, teenagers looking for a thrill. 47 names in total, and next to each name was a date and a single word: admitted. The last name on the list was Tyler Kowalski. The date was the night he disappeared. And someone had recently added a note in the margin, written in the same shaky handwriting from the Polaroid: responding well to treatment, prognosis, long-term residency.
There's a town in Nebraska called Minden, population 2,923, where the corn grows taller than anywhere else in the state. The stalks reach 12, sometimes 15 feet high. Their leaves so thick and green they look almost artificial. Farmers from neighboring counties come to see it. Agricultural scientists take samples, but no one can explain why Minden's corn is different. The soil composition is the same as surrounding areas. The weather patterns are identical. There's no logical reason for it. But the people of Minden know the reason. They just don't talk about it, especially not to outsiders, and especially not in September, when the harvest comes. In September of 2018, the Patterson family moved to Minden from Seattle. David Patterson had accepted a position as vice principal at Minden High School, and his wife Jennifer had secured a remote job that allowed them to work from anywhere. Their 2 children, Emma, age 14, and Noah, age 9, were less enthusiastic about trading the Pacific Northwest for the Nebraska plains, but they adapted as children do. The Pattersons bought a farmhouse on the eastern edge of town, a beautiful 2-story colonial with white siding and a wraparound porch. The property came with 20 acres of land, most of it leased to a local farmer named Jeremiah Hutchins for growing corn. Mr. Hutchins was a weathered man in his 70s who'd worked the land for 5 decades. When the Pattersons met him during the home inspection, he was polite but distant, his eyes constantly drifting toward the cornfields that surrounded the property. "You'll like it here," Mr. Hutchins said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "Quiet town. Good people. Just follow the rules and you'll be fine." "Rules?" David asked with a smile, thinking the old man was joking. "Don't go in the corn after dark," Mr. Hutchins said, his expression deadly serious. "Not in September. Not ever, but especially not in September. And if you hear children laughing out there at night, you stay inside. Lock your doors. Cover your ears if you have to, but you don't go looking. You understand?" Jennifer had laughed nervously. Is this some kind of local legend, small-town ghost story to scare the city folks? Mr. Hutchins didn't laugh. He simply touched the brim of his hat and walked back to his truck. As he drove away, Emma thought she saw him make the sign of the cross, though she couldn't be sure. The first few weeks were normal. David started his new job, the kids enrolled in school, and Jennifer set up her home office in the converted attic space. The neighbors were friendly but reserved, always offering waves and polite greetings but never staying long for conversation. It was as if the entire town operated under some unspoken agreement to keep outsiders at arm's length. Emma made friends with a girl at school named Casey Brennan, whose family had lived in Minden for 6 generations. One afternoon in late August, Emma asked Casey about Mr. Hutchins' warning. "Oh, that," Casey said, her voice dropping to a whisper even though they were alone in Casey's bedroom. "It's not a legend, Emma. It's real. Every town has its price, you know. Some places pay with money, some with labor. Minden pays with something else. That's cryptic and weird. What does that even mean?" Casey bit her lip, clearly debating whether to continue. Finally, she pulled out an old yearbook from 1976. She flipped to a page showing the 8th grade class. "Count the students, Emma," she said. Emma counted. 43 students in the photo. Casey turned to another yearbook from 1977. Emma counted again. Only 39 students. 4 were missing. "Where did they go?" Emma asked. "The corn took them," Casey whispered. "During the harvest of 76. It happens every few years. Not every year, thank God, but every few years the corn gets hungry, and it takes children. Always children between the ages of 8 and 15. The town knows. The parents know. But what are we supposed to do? Leave? The corn won't let us leave. Families have tried. They pack up, drive away, and somehow they always end up back here. The roads just loop. Like the whole town is a trap." Emma had laughed it off, deciding Casey was either messing with her or was genuinely disturbed. But that night, lying in bed, she heard it for the first time. Children laughing in the cornfield. High, bright laughter that sounded joyful and wrong at the same time. She got up and looked out her window. The corn swayed in the moonlight, though there was no wind, and between the stalks she saw movement. Small figures, children-sized, running through the rows. She didn't go investigate. Something in her bones told her that would be a terrible mistake. September arrived, and with it came the town's annual Harvest Festival. It should have been a cheerful event. Carnival games, bake sales, a parade down Main Street. But there was a tension underlying everything, a forced quality to the smiles and laughter. Parents held their children's hands tighter than necessary. Groups of adults would stop conversations when the Patterson family approached, their eyes carrying a mixture of pity and guilt. On September 15th, Noah disappeared. He'd been playing in the backyard after school, and Jennifer had checked on him around 4:30 p.m. By 5 p.m., he was gone. David and Jennifer searched the house, the barn, the garage. They called his name until their voices were hoarse. And then David saw the trail. Small footprints leading from the backyard into the cornfield, disappearing between the towering stalks.
"No," Jennifer breathed. "No, no, no! David, we can't!" But David was already running into the corn, Jennifer close behind. Emma stood at the edge of the field, her phone in her hand, ready to call 911. But something stopped her. The same instinct that had kept her in bed that night when she'd heard the laughter. Inside the cornfield, David and Jennifer found themselves in a maze. The rows should have been straight, planted in neat lines by Mr. Hutchins' tractor, but the paths twisted and curved, branching off in impossible directions. The corn towered over them, blocking out the fading sunlight, and the temperature dropped with each step they took deeper into the field. "Noah!" David shouted. "Noah, where are you?" They heard him then, Noah's voice, calling out from somewhere ahead. "Dad! Mom! I'm here! I can't find my way out!" They ran toward the sound, pushing through the stalks, the sharp leaves cutting at their faces and arms. But no matter how far they went, Noah's voice stayed the same distance away, always ahead, always just out of reach. And then Jennifer noticed the other sounds, rustling all around them. Whispers that might have been wind through leaves, except the words were almost clear, almost understandable. Join us. Play with us. Stay with us. Forever. David grabbed Jennifer's arm. This isn't right. We need to go back. Get help. They turned to retrace their steps, but the path behind them had changed. The corn had closed in. Stalks that had been yards apart now pressed together in an impenetrable wall. They were trapped. That's when they saw the children. They emerged from between the stalks, dozens of them, wearing clothes from different eras. A girl in a prairie dress from the 1800s, a boy in bell-bottoms from the 1970s, twins in matching overalls from the 1950s, and more, so many more, all standing silent and still, their eyes reflecting moonlight that shouldn't have been visible through the dense canopy of corn. At the front of the group stood Noah, his expression blank, his hand held by a little girl in a white nightgown. "Noah, come here right now!" Noah didn't move. The little girl spoke instead, her voice like dried husks rubbing together. "He belongs to the corn now. The harvest requires payment. It always has. Your town prospers. Your crops never fail. Your people never go hungry. And in return, we are fed. The cycle continues." "You're insane," David said, though his voice shook. "He's our son. You can't just take him." "Can't we?" Another child stepped forward, a boy who looked about 12, wearing a Minden High School t-shirt from 2003. "Ask your neighbors. Ask Mr. Hutchins. He gave his youngest daughter in 1989. Ask the Brennans. They lost a son in 2001. Ask anyone who's lived here more than a decade. They all know the price. They all paid it. And now it's your turn." David lunged forward, trying to grab Noah, but his hands passed through the boy as if he were made of smoke. Noah and the other children began to fade, becoming translucent, then transparent, then gone. The corn around David and Jennifer shuddered, the stalks bending toward them like grasping hands. "Run," Jennifer said. "David, run!" They ran blindly, crashing through the corn, no longer caring about direction or paths. They ran until they burst out of the field and collapsed on their front lawn, gasping for breath. Emma rushed to them, crying, asking where Noah was. David couldn't answer. He looked back at the cornfield, and for just a moment, he saw them. All the children, standing at the edge of the stalks, Noah among them, waving goodbye. And then they stepped back into the corn and vanished. The police searched the field for 3 days. They brought dogs, helicopters, volunteers from every neighboring county. They found nothing. No trace of Noah, no evidence of where he'd gone. The field was just a field, the corn growing in perfect straight rows like it always had. Mr. Hutchins came by the house a week later. He brought a casserole and an envelope. Inside the envelope was a check for $50,000 and a handwritten note. "I'm sorry. We're all sorry. The money comes from the town fund. It's not enough. It could never be enough, but it's all we can give. Stay, and the corn won't ask again for another 7 years. Or leave if you can. Though I should tell you, I've seen the roads. I know what happens when people try to leave." The Pattersons stayed, not because they wanted to, but because when they tried to leave, they found that Mr. Hutchins was right. No matter which road they took out of Minden, no matter how carefully they followed GPS directions, they always ended up back at their house. The corn wouldn't let them go. They were part of the cycle now, part of the harvest. David still works as vice principal at Minden High School. Jennifer still works from her home office. Emma is a senior now, counting down the days until she turns 18, though part of her wonders if even that will be enough to break free. And sometimes, late at night in September, they hear Noah's laughter coming from the cornfield. High and bright and joyful. He sounds happy, in a way, like he's playing an endless game with friends who will never grow old, never leave, never stop running through the corn. And maybe, in whatever realm the children exist in now, he is happy. Maybe the corn takes care of its own. Maybe there are worse fates than becoming part of the harvest.
But Emma doesn't think so. She lies awake at night, listening to her brother's laughter, and she plans, she researches, she reads everything she can find about Minden's history, about towns that make bargains, about ancient rituals and blood sacrifices, and crops that demand more than water and sunlight. There has to be a way to break the cycle. There has to be a way to bring Noah home. Or at least, there has to be a way to make sure no other family loses a child to the corn. The harvest comes every few years, Mr. Hutchins said. The last one was 2018, which means the next one is coming soon. And when it does, Emma plans to be ready. She's going to burn the corn to the ground. The town doesn't know it yet, but the cycle is about to break. One way or another, the children of Minden are coming home, where the corn is going to take everyone. 3 weeks after Noah's disappearance, Emma found something in the town library. She'd been researching Minden's history, going through old newspapers and archived documents, when she discovered a pattern. The harvest didn't happen randomly. It followed a specific cycle tied to astronomical events. Every 7 years, when Mars was in retrograde during the autumn equinox, the corn demanded its payment. The last occurrences were documented in 2018, 2011, 2004, 1997, 1990, 1983, and going back as far as the town's founding in 1878. But there was something else. A newspaper article from 1891, written by a traveling journalist who'd passed through Minden and noticed the town's unusual prosperity. The journalist, a man named Samuel Crawford, had interviewed the town's founder, Josiah Minden, who'd let slip a disturbing detail while drunk on corn whiskey. "We made a deal with something old," Josiah had said, "something that was here before us, sleeping beneath the prairie. We woke it up when we planted the first seeds. It spoke to us through the corn. It said it would make us prosper, make our crops grow tall and our family strong. All it wanted in return was to taste youth, to remember what it was like to be young and alive. So we feed it. Every 7 years we give it children, and it gives us everything we need. It's a fair trade when you think about it. 7 years of prosperity for 1 moment of sacrifice." The journalist had thought it was the ramblings of a drunk old man and hadn't published the interview, but he'd kept his notes, and those notes had eventually been donated to the library after his death. Emma photocopied everything. She needed proof. She needed evidence that would make people believe her when she told them what had to be done. Because burning the corn wasn't enough, she'd learned that much from her research. The entity, whatever it was, existed beneath the fields, in the soil itself. The corn was just its method of feeding, its way of reaching up from whatever hell it inhabited to touch the world above. To truly free Minden, someone would have to go deeper. Someone would have to go down into the earth and confront the thing that Josiah Minden had awakened over a century ago. Emma turned 18 in October, and on November 1st, 2023, she purchased a tank of gasoline, a shovel, and a book on exorcism rituals from an occult store 3 towns over. The harvest is coming in 2025, and Emma Patterson is going to be waiting. The corn might take her. The town might stop her. The entity beneath the fields might consume her like it's consumed so many others. But she's going to try. For Noah. For all the children who came before and for all the children who might come after. Because some cycles need to be broken, no matter the cost. If you've made it this far, you're braver than most. Comment below. Would you stay in Minden and fight? Or would you try to escape? And don't forget to smash that like button. It helps more than you know. 3 stories, 3 nightmares, 3 pieces of Nebraska's dark heart laid bare before you. the hitchhiker who never left Highway 77, the asylum that refuses to close, and the corn that feeds on children. These aren't just stories, they're warnings. Warnings that some places hold secrets better left undiscovered, that some roads should never be traveled, that some bargains can't be broken. But here's the thing about darkness. It only wins if we refuse to shine a light on it. By watching this video, by hearing these stories, you're keeping these victims alive in memory. Sarah Henning still waiting at mile marker 34. Tyler Kowalski trapped in Dr. Morrison's eternal treatment. Noah Patterson running forever through the corn. They want to be remembered. They need to be remembered. Because maybe, just maybe, if enough people know their stories, if enough people refuse to forget, these cycles can be broken. Maybe the next traveler on Highway 77 will know to drive past. Maybe the next urban explorer will skip the Hastings Asylum. Maybe the next family moving to Minden will ask the right questions before signing that deed. Or maybe these stories will add to the darkness. Maybe they'll draw more people in, curious and brave and foolish. Maybe they'll create more victims, more ghosts, more voices calling out in the night. I guess we'll find out. Next week, I'm taking you somewhere even darker, somewhere that makes Nebraska look like a vacation destination. Until then, keep your doors locked, your lights on, and whatever you do, don't trust the corn. This has been another journey into America's hidden darkness. Subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next, because trust me, you won't want to face it alone. And if these stories kept you up at night, hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and drop a comment telling me which story terrified you most. Stay safe out there, or don't. Either way, I'll see you in the darkness.